Okay. Actually, napakadali lang ng crosshatching. Joke lang. Actually, mahirap siya. Ito, gusto kong pakita sa inyo. Gusto ko lang gumawa ng sample kung paano mag-crosshatch. Dahil medyo may konting, I guess, planning involved para malaman mo how you're going to apply your strokes. So, when we talk about hatching, it's in one direction. Now, if you want to build tones, by the name itself, cross-hatching means you have to overlay yung strokes na yun. That's why yung overlaying of these diagonal strokes will create additional tones and density. Now, itong ginagawa ko ngayon, it's just a simple picture of shapes. Tapos, I'm starting out by drawing yung midtones. I'm drawing the strokes in one direction muna. And then, as I go further, I'm going to cross those diagonals to create the additional tones. Now, medyo kailangan ng practice for cross-hatching. Especially when you use pen and ink or drawing pens, there's so little margin for error. And personally, hindi ako pen and ink expert. But I wanted to show this or wanted to tackle this topic so kahit na we missed it last semester, because for the longest time, pen and ink has been one of the mainstays of an illustrator's toolkit. There used to be a time when it was hard to reproduce artworks through printing. So mahirap mag-create ng tones because of printing limitations. And the way illustrators got around that was through pen and ink. So through pen and ink, illustrators could create tones and subtle tones. Kaya this medium has always been an important part of an illustrator's toolkit. That's why I feel it's important for you to at least be exposed to pen and ink. I don't know, maybe someday some of you will become pen and ink experts. Some of you may fall in love with the medium. That's why, we'll tackle pen and ink. So here, I'm just laying down, for some of the areas, I'm laying down the midtones. So nakita nyo, the strokes are just in one direction. And then as I go further, to prevent myself from getting bored, minsan I crisscross these lines to create the tones. So immediately nakikita ko na yung result if I get impatient or whatever. I think one of the tips that I can give you to lock your wrists when you're drawing long lines for pen and ink, as I'll show you later in this demonstration. So most of the time when I'm trying to draw long strokes, I'm trying to lock my wrists and the force of the stroke is coming from my arm. So I'm trying as much as possible na little movement sa wrist para hindi masyado nanginginig. Now, honestly, pasmado ako. And yung stroke ko, it's not really the most stable stroke. Now, what you can do is pwede nyong sadyain yung panginginig. Embrace the imperfection of your line and somehow make it part of the drawing or the character of the drawing. In this case, I definitely can't reproduce the image as precisely as I want it. So, sinasadya ko yung panginginig minsan nung linya para nagiging parte siya nung itsura ng buong or aesthetic ng buong drawing. Now, medyo boring panoorin to ng napakahaba kasi marami dito sa demonstration na to. Basta parang nagdo-drawing lang ako ng linya ng paulit-ulit. So, I'd like to show you samples of really pen and ink masters. To show you some illustrators, a lot of these illustrators patay na, pero they were considered masters of the medium. First up, the American artist Bernie Wrightson, who drew the book Frankenstein. Well, one of the illustrated books na ginawa niya is Frankenstein. And actually, I saw the edition, itong edition na to sa Fully Booked recently. And if you look at his artworks, they're very moody, suffused with lights and darks. And the tone and the mood is created simply by, creating these hatch marks and cross hatch marks purely by ink. So the midtones and the darks are created purely by ink by crossing the strokes and building the tones through those strokes. So Bernie Wrightson is a famous American illustrator. One of his more famous works, aside from this edition of Frankenstein, is Swamp Thing. I also have one of his books entitled Batman Cult, which he also drew. Punta naman tayo sa Pilipinas, Alfredo Alcala. Now, I think back in the 70s, nagkaroon ng exodus of Filipino comics artists because comics was really big in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And there came a time wherein napakagaling ng mga Filipino illustrators, and nagkaroon ng hiring sa States, and a lot of these illustrators went to the States. So one of the more famous illustrators back then was Alfredo Alcala, and you can see his line work, his lush line work. And for some of these images, gumamit siya ng brush and quill pen. Nakikita nyo may variation in line weight. So similar with Bernie Wrightson, they manipulate line and tone not just by hatching and cross hatching, but also through changes in line weight. Now, I'm going to switch back to my drawing right now. So you can see that right now I'm building the background, and I've laid down the initial tone of the background, and it's just in one stroke. And now I'm going to draw the next overlay of tone, and I'm going to draw my lines perpendicular to the initial lay-in. Now, sped up, mukhang yung stroke ko looks so stable, but actually it's not. But I'm trying my best to stabilize my wrist. And like I said, kailangan nakalock yung wrist nyo, and the arm is doing most of the moving. And I'm trying to do the stroke just in one direction. So in this case, from left to right. And to allow me to do the variation of strokes, yung page yung ginagalaw ko. So most of the time, my wrist or my drawing arm is just in one direction. Binavary ko na lang yung pressure and yung stroke, but the page, I'm going to be moving the page around so I can control yung direction ng stroke ko. So now, halimbawa ito, parang napaka-stable nung kamay, pero actually hindi. Nakikita nyo yung background, hindi naman diretso-diretso yung linya ko. Pero ang ginagawa ko na lang, sinasadya ko yung pagka-imperfect ng linya as I'm drawing the crosshatch. Let's move on to the third illustrator I'm going to show, another Filipino named Alex Niño. Now, Alex Niño is still active. May kakaibang quality rin yung illustration niya. Very stylized. So makita nyo dito yung use of cross-hatching in creating figures. So right now we're just doing shapes, we're doing naturalistic elements, but cross-hatching and these techniques can be applied to the creation of made-up worlds and made-up creatures. So maganda siyang medium for doing these things. Next up is an Italian illustrator named Sergio Toppi. Very stylized in yung trabaho niya, as you can see. It looks like his line was made by a quill pen or a flexible nib pens na dilulublob. Aside from the cross-hatching, there is also a difference in line weight. Some parts are thicker while some parts become thinner. So very lively yung trabaho niya, very stylized. Now, the drawings in this demonstration were done a long time apart. And in between that time, I actually replaced my drawing pen. Although same yung point size, which is 0.05. I don't know, maybe differences ng quality ng pen, although they're of the same brand. This pen that I'm using currently looks a bit thicker than the initial pen that I used. So, there's that. So, parang nagkaroon ng difference in line weight. So, makikita nyo yung pyramid doon sa foreground, parang mas manipis yung linya, pero itong nasa background mas makapal. Pero actually, I used the same drawing pen. Now, you see my drawing now, I'm making the third lay-in. I've done the next stroke, diagonal naman, para mas mag-create pa ako ng additional tones. It's gonna take a while. So, the last artist I'd like to show you is the French artist Jean Giraud, also known as Moebius. And his work is if you notice the work, the line quality of the work doesn't really vary. Makita nyo yung line compared to sa mga iba kong pinakita before, looks like it was drawn with a single point. And the tones are built with hatching and cross hatching. And in this case, the way he does his tones, he draws the contour of the object or the subject, and then, you know, parang binibuild niya yung volume by following the contour. Ganda rin ang trabaho niya. He's a famous graphic novelist who's also passed away, but he's one of the giants of the medium. Okay, now I'm wrapping this up. I'm just building the tones, layering the strokes on top of one another so that I can finish the drawing.